So honored to talk again with Dr. Bart Ehrman. Your name comes up all the time in conversations. I don't know if you realize that people like to toss your name out. Like, Dr. Ehrman says, and we'll have a discussion about, Jesus studies and the New Testament. For those who aren't familiar with your work, give me kind of an introduction, the kind of thing that would be on your website or in one of your books. Who are you?
So I'm a professor of early Christianity and the New Testament in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I've taught there since 1988. I was teaching for several years at Rutgers before that. Did a PhD in New Testament studies at Princeton Theological Seminary. And so I write books for scholars dealing with various technical things in the field, and books for broader audiences on issues related to Jesus, the New Testament, early Christianity, the books that didn't get into the New Testament, basically early Christianity from Jesus up to the Emperor Constantine.
You've got a debate coming up with an apologist, and we'll get into some of the specifics. Am I saying his name right? Is it Licona? Michael Licona?
Yeah, Mike Licona, that's right.
He's a New Testament scholar, a leading evangelical apologist on the resurrection. I know he teaches theology at Houston Baptist. I'm not going to spend much time on the historical Jesus question. I know you've been down this. I'll be upfront. I'll say that I think the question's interesting. I was the Jesus myth based on an actual dude or not? I mean, in my own mind, I think it's unknowable. I don't know. I think it's kind of academic. But I mean, if somebody comes to you and they're like, well, we know there was a Jesus, or we strongly believe there was a Jesus. I mean, just for the record, how do you lay that out? Because we know the apologist is going to rest most of what he says about the resurrection, the topic of the debate, on the assumption that there was a literal Jesus, right?
Well, yeah, and I think he's absolutely right. I mean, there was. So I know this is a debate on the internet, but when you first said the question about the historical Jesus, I didn't expect you to go there because, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, it's not a debated issue in scholarship.
It's not debated, though. I mean, it's not like I have a dog in this fight.
No, it's not. No, it's not debated.
Let me tell you where I'm thinking, and you can tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, right. Dr. Ehrman?
All right.
But if we know that the books of the Bible were written long decades after the alleged life of Christ. And I know we talk about Paul writing, 13 of the Bible books, supposedly. I don't even know how we know that. I mean, there was a guy named Paul. What was he like? But do we have proper documentation for Paul? I mean, don't you see that I look at a lot of this and I just see a white noise of how can you nail that down? It becomes, in my mind, problematic. So that's my vantage. I mean, how do you speak to that?
Well, I've written an entire book on it.
All right, fine. I'll go read that.
So I mean, I'm just saying there's no debate among scholars. This is not people who are historians, whether they are experts in the New Testament or early Christianity or ancient Judaism or early Roman Empire or ancient Greece, or you go to any university in the country and ask any scholar of antiquity, and they will not know it's a debate, except for people who go on the internet and listen to the mythicists. No, I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious. Well, I'm absolutely serious. I literally know thousands and thousands of New Testament people in these various fields, and not one of them. This is not a debate.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, beyond what the scholars are saying.
The reason they say it is because look. Do you think there was a Plato?
Well, the difference is, though, that Plato wasn't claiming to be a divine being on earth.
It was Jesus.
So I can look at... No,
Jesus didn't claim to be a divine being.
But the foundational tenet of Christianity is that Jesus was a divine being, right?
That has no bearing on the value of the historical sources.
But if there was a Jesus and the chronicles of Jesus happened in a way that how do I know that? That to me it's a dot I'm not connecting.
Look, I get it. The reason people don't get it is because they don't study ancient history and they don't know how ancient historians work. Ancient historians doubt everything. We doubt everything. We doubt whether there was a Socrates, and we look for evidence. Did Julius Caesar cross the Rubicon? Well, why should we believe he did? We look for the evidence. And all I'm saying is that people who actually look at the evidence, who don't go at it trying to disprove it, but actually just don't care one way or the other, they just want to know, there's not a debate about this. The debate is among people who, have reasons for not wanting to think Jesus existed. So I just think it's a non-starter.
All right.
I'm happy to talk about it. If you really want
that's
the
not
evidence,
why we're having this conversation.
no. If anyone wants to talk, I'm happy to talk about it because I can tell you what the evidence is. But all I'm saying is it's so overwhelming that it's not a debate among scholars, and it's
All
not
right.
just because they're hoity-toity. It's just like
I'm not a scholar. I mean, I am coming to this as an ex-evangelical who was a Bible literalist who had no idea. I mean, I still have no idea who wrote any of the 66 books of the Bible. I'm just that guy. Okay. And if you have, I'm sure the comment section is going to go nuts. Send your email to he's heard this shit before at bartehrman.com. And I'm sure you'll get a reply.
I'll tell you, the people I get the most heat from are the mythicists. It's very funny. I get more heat from the mythicists than I do from the fundamentalists.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting to me, for me in my own activism, because I'm occasionally asked about Jesus. What do you think? Was it a real guy? And I'm like, if I know that there's no evidence that the God man existed, the guy who walked on water and fed the 5,000 and levitated into the sky and died on the cross to, as a blood atonement for billions. If I know there's no reason to believe that, then the rest for me is it's academic. It's interesting.
Well, that's fair enough. And I agree with that because I don't think there was a man back there doing all these miracles and who was raised from the dead and went to heaven. I don't think that at all. But it's not because Jesus didn't exist. It's because legends sprang up around him. Just like I don't think that George Washington really cut down the cherry tree. In fact, I know he didn't. Yeah. But I think there was a George Washington. And so I think the problem is that mythicists are, they're out to destroy Christianity. Fair enough. That's what they want to do. But I don't think this is the right way to do it because people who actually know this stuff just think that's not a good argument. There are better arguments to make.
My inbox. Maybe I should have just left it alone.
There you go.
Let's move on. Let's move on because that's not the discussion we're having. And in advance of this upcoming debate, I don't debate. I mean, I've gotten into some discussions that might be called debates. I'm more of I like conversations, but debate is a very specific skill.
Yeah.
And, what I've seen is there seem to be, especially when you're debating theists, kind of these gotcha moments. Well, if you've read the work of philosopher A, B, or C, or if you read intelligent design scientist X, Y, or Z, you would know, have you not read these people? And then the idea is they're making you look unprepared, uninformed, ignorant on this critical and important subject. Have you gotten into some of these tactics? I mean, before you get into a debate, how do you prepare in advance of that kind of thing?
Oh, I don't prepare for that kind of thing. I think, ad hominem arguments and have you read so-and-so kinds of arguments they almost never have any bearing on the topic. Just like my now saying that no scholar debates this. I mean, I'm not trying to prove it that Jesus existed. I'm just saying, that's not so. But
you're saying that as scholars debate it. That's all I'm saying. Like you would say that everybody who's a mythicist is then not a scholar, and that's where I sort of trip.
You will not find a mythicist in any department of religious studies or Roman history or Greek history or Jewish history in the country that I know of.
God, I just totally jumped back into that. That's my fault, everybody. That's my fault. Sorry about that. Okay. But back into the debate. You don't worry about the verbal grenade, the setup, the gotcha moment whenever
you can't really worry about it because what are you going to do? I mean, you can't prepare for it. I mean, you can't read everything. You can't know every book that somebody's read. They might read some crazy book and say, but you haven't read so-and-so. I go, yeah.
Is there a criteria before you get into a debate? Like you have to be convinced they're operating in good faith, or will you just debate anybody, or kind of
I don't debate just anybody. I debate Mike Licona because he's a nice guy. And, I debated Robert Price on mythicism, and people can see that debate. I won't debate some mythicists because I don't think they're decent human beings, or at least they haven't been to me or to others. But Mike Licona is a good guy. He's written a couple books. He's intelligent, and he has a view that I think is untenable. And so I'm happy to talk about it because he's not going to do any crazy things. I will say that I've had a number of evangelicals I've debated on various issues who've done really slimy things. And I think it's not good. Not just kind of gotcha moments, but like I debated somebody. Well, actually, I debated Mike Licona once. I debated Mike Licona on some topic or other at a Christian seminary. And we were told that we were going to, after we were done with the debate, we were going to both go out and sign books. And so, and that they're going to dismiss the crowd after we got out there. So we finished our debate, and they took us down to the basement of this church or whatever, with the seminary, to have a drink. And we're having a Diet Coke or something. And I'm thinking, boy, sure, it's taking a long time. And about 40 minutes pass. What is going on here? They had brought in professors from the seminary to explain to the audience why Mike was right and I was wrong.
Wow. Well, it's like debate by ambush is what that sounded like. So.
I left the room. Then they explained why I didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get more into the debate, but, I know you've got this new course. Do you call it a course, a series on Genesis? You're known as a New Testament guy. I know you're a Bible guy.
Yeah.
I know that's your background, but you just get tired of talking about the New Testament. You decide to go back to Genesis 1:1, or what motivates that?
I've never gotten tired of talking about the New Testament, but look, the Old Testament's fantastic, and it was my secondary field in my PhD, and all the way through my education, it was my secondary field, and so I learned Hebrew, and you read it in Hebrew, and you just it's like I've taught Old Testament for a long time as well. I'm not teaching it now, but I have done, and so Genesis is an amazing book, and of course, it's myths and legends, but they're fantastic. And people don't really know much about it other than it's there. And so this course is 6 lectures dealing with what scholars say about Genesis, about how, different creation stories and how it's related to myths in other parts of the world, and like where it came from and who wrote that thing anyway, and that kind of stuff. So it's only the first part. I'm going to do a long series of just about the entire Bible. So I just started with Genesis. And so I'm going to do like all sorts of stuff.
I've got a link to that in the description box, and I encourage everybody to jump in, as I'm going to be jumping in as well, but was there a real Moses? Because obviously we hear many apologists, and I've heard this from formal apologists, PhD types, who say that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. And I'm just thinking, how do we even, So I guess we start with Genesis. Do you get into authorship? Holy shit. Foundational book of the foundational book of an entire religion, right?
No, I do get into authorship, but I don't think Moses wrote it. And I don't think Moses existed. It's, and people say, well, if you don't think Moses, why do you think Jesus exists?
Yeah, I saw
look
that
at the
coming.
evidence. Yeah. It's like you see if there's evidence. And so it takes years to do all that. But I don't think there's some good arguments that there was somebody named Moses, and they're worth considering. For example, Moses is an Egyptian name. That's interesting. Why would they come up with an Egyptian? But I don't think there's really nothing. There's nothing.
So I know that Christianity seems to be evolving away from a literal Adam and Eve as more and more of the evidence against it seems to mount, but then it becomes Adam and Eve as metaphor. This is some kind of a life lesson intended to better us in some way. I have no idea what that lesson would even be. If you look at Adam and Eve, what comes to your mind? What are you thinking? Like, what lesson do I glean from that, right?
I think I think there are lessons that can be learned, but I don't think it's like unique to the Bible. I read a lot of literature, and I think that literature doesn't have to be historical to make you think and make you decide what it means to be human and how you want to live and how you don't want to live, and understanding big questions in life. That's why I read literature. I read a lot of Victorian literature, for example. It's not because I think David Copperfield really lived. And so I think Adam and Eve, it's trying to teach religious lessons, and it's trying to teach people that, and one thing it's trying to teach is that the reason our world is so messed up is because we've messed it up. And when I'm looking at Ukraine right now, I'm thinking, that's pretty much it. Messed another one up.
But I hear that. Dr. Ehrman, I just don't want to be the asshole interviewer, but I'm thinking to myself, like, if you look at Genesis, we're talking about an innocuous mistake, right? That Yahweh creates fallible humans, imperfect humans, and then punishes them for acting imperfectly. And then you're looking at, the generational curse, and now childbirth has to be excruciating because the woman and all these other problematic things. So when I read Genesis, I don't think, well, we're human beings often working against our own interests or the interest of others. We have real problems. I look at that and I think, well, this is, the whole original sin narrative for me becomes hugely problematic. I don't see it as, are you being deferential to the book of Genesis?
Well,
do you think it's a good story, or?
I do think it's a good story, and I think Genesis is a great book, and I'm deferential to most literature I read, unless it's like advocating things I completely disagree with. I do completely disagree with lots of Genesis. I don't think women have trouble in childbirth because she ate the fruit. And I don't think that serpents crawl on their belly because God cursed them. They originally had legs. It's not like that. I think I decide what it is that's valuable in this great literature. And I'm not affirming it in the sense that I believe it or something. I just think, well, actually, it's got a pretty good point here, and it makes me think about it. And so I think I think it's just a value of literature, and great religious literature makes you think about big questions. I think part of the problem, Seth, is that we read Genesis through Christian eyes, and we think about original sin and things like that, and none of that's in there. So the idea that our putting sin into this thing isn't really quite the way the author has trying to engage with this material. It's just, look, it's folklore. It's folklore. It's not.
But if you look at the major platforms of, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Assemblies of God, and the major denominations, they don't hold this sort of cafeteria conciliatory, let's glean the good stuff. Let's take the gems and leave the shit over here. No, they're selling it as an absolute truth. That becomes hugely problematic, right? Of
course it does. Yeah, no, I've devoted my entire career against that kind of reading. I think it's completely wrong.
But if it's sold as a divine, perfect word from on high, how else would you read it?
Yeah.
No, and I think that's one of the gripes.
I
think one of the gripes that we have though with the Bible is they say it's perfect. Inerrant is the word, or inerrancy is the word I often see.
Well, so I don't think it's. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's not the Bible's fault. Whoever wrote Genesis didn't plan it to be the inerrant word of God that would control the Southern Baptist Convention. It's like he's writing some stories. And, there are lots of ancient people who wrote stories. I like the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think it teaches some really interesting stories. So the fact somebody else misuses it doesn't keep me from thinking there's actually something decent here.
Speaking of the Epic of Gilgamesh, now that I've got Dr. Bart Ehrman here, is it true that the Noah's Ark story was informed by the Gilgamesh legend, or is that itself legend?
No. I talk about that in my course. I devoted one of the 6 lectures just to that. The flood story, the creation story, a number of the stories in Genesis were floating around in different forms before Genesis. This is really, it's beyond dispute. We have forms of the flood story that are over 1,000 years earlier. That we have them in forms that were 1,000 years earlier than Genesis. And so, and in Gilgamesh, there's a very, very close parallel to what you get in the Noah story. And so it's not narrating what really happened. And it's not like somebody coming up with something for the first time. It's somebody retelling a story. But, Shakespeare's Hamlet is retelling a story, but it doesn't keep me from appreciating it.
They're not teaching, Shakespeare's Hamlet to 4-year-olds and saying, believe this or you're going to go to hell. And unfortunately, this is epidemic within the Christian church.
Well, it is within the fundamentalist church. It absolutely is. And the evangelical church. But I don't, that's not, the fact that somebody misuses it doesn't matter to me in terms of the value of the thing itself.
Yeah.
People use cars to kill people with, but I'm not against cars.
I'm going to have to think about that analogy here. I'm just going to have to stew on that.
Oh, no. People take cars and they mow people down with them. It's a bad use of cars.
Yeah, but if you look at the Bible as built as a vehicle, and the vehicle has some seriously faulty elements within it, and the Bible does, right? And I'm not telling you anything. You're Dr. Bart Ehrman. But if many of the components are themselves faulty, problematic, even dangerous, then we have to examine that before we examine whether or not driving a car is dangerous. So that's, I think, that where I trip a little bit at that metaphor. But
I get it. But the manufacturer of the car didn't design it for those purposes. And the manufacturer of Genesis did not design it as an inerrant scripture to tell us that, in fact, evolution is wrong. That's not what the book of Genesis is about. It's a misuse of Genesis.
What do you think Genesis, in your opinion, what was it written for? I mean, what do you think or authors were trying to do?
I think they're trying to explain why it is that the world is the way it is. And, of course, we don't agree that Adam and Eve were like the first two human beings, and that their son Cain, the third person on the human on Earth, built a city. Yeah. So we take it. I take it as folklore, and I like ancient folklore, and this particular folklore has informed the Western consciousness for thousands of years. And so why wouldn't I want to study it?
Well, it is something I'm hugely interested in. And again, I'll put the link to that course in the description box. I want people to go and take that journey, because I really do want to hear what you have to say on the subject.
Yeah.
When you yourself were in Bible college, did you want to become an apologist? Did you want to become the very person you're about to debate? Was that on your plate?
It was. And in fact, I was an apologist. I used to... So I was pretty hardcore in my evangelical faith, and I thought you could prove the faith. At Moody Bible Institute, I took a semester-long course on apologetics, and I was really drawn to it because I liked argument, I liked debate, I liked logical thinking, and for many years I argued that you can prove the resurrection, and so that's why. So I get this point of view. This is the point of view I used to have. And I just, now it's like, now that I'm older and wiser, at least older, I just think, wow, really?
Well, I won't make you have the debate here. Now, when is the debate? I'll put that link in as well, but what's the date? What's the target we're looking for here?
It's April 9th. And it's not just like he gets 20 minutes and I get 20 minutes, then we turn the thing off. This is an all day affair. We're going at it. It's going to be,
I think I like the idea of it not being 5-minute opening statement, rebuttal. And I hope there's some engagement where you guys are able to play off each other.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, this is going to be, it's not, I don't see this as getting boring. I think, there's a lot to talk about, because it has to do with, how do you know what happened in the past? I mean, can you say that, like, somebody was raised from the dead, never to die again? Is that like a historical statement, or is that it's a Christian belief, but is it historical? I mean, it's like, whoa, how do you decide what's historical? Really? I mean, how many historians do you know who write books about the Second World War claim that the Allies won because God, intervened at the Battle of the Bulge or something? I mean, it's not the kind of thing that historians do. And so if you're going to do it with Jesus, how do you justify that?
People throw Josephus at you all the time when it comes to Christ. I know that's a go-to for many of the theologians out there.
Well, the people who are most interested in Josephus now are the mythicists, because they want to say that his references to Jesus are not actually from Josephus, but they've been interpolated into Josephus's writings. And in my field, Josephus is really valuable for one thing and kind of valuable for something else. The thing Josephus is really valuable for is that since Christianity began in Israel in the first century, Josephus is our primary source of information about first century Israel and about the history of Israel. He has a 20-volume work on the history of the Jewish people up to his own day at the end of the first century. And he spends most of the time on that period. He has another 6-volume work on the Jewish War, the uprising against Rome. So if you want to know about what was going on at the time of the birth of both what became our forms of Judaism and what became our forms of Christianity, Josephus is the guy. So that's what he's big for. The thing he's kind of important for us. He mentioned Jesus a couple of times. Well, that's nice, but it's not like it is not the big thing for Josephus scholars. Don't do their spend their days and nights studying his comments about Jesus. They're just a couple comments.
It brings me to the point of corroborating historians for Jesus-related events. I'm reminded of probably one of the best examples is when Christ dies on the cross and the resurrected saints pop up out of the ground and shamble through the streets of Jerusalem, and not one contemporary historian chronicled this event. Zombies walking Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no historian chronicles any of these events that you find in the Gospels. And so there are huge historical problems with the Gospels. But there aren't any historians that chronicle the life of Josephus either. We have no references to him. And so there weren't that many historians talking about first century Israel, just about none that we know of. And so it's not particularly surprising we don't have that kind of thing. But it would be very surprising if we had a chronicle of somebody saying there were these zombies walking around. That would be interesting.
So, what do you suspect, or maybe you already know since you've debated and spoken to him? And I appreciate the fact that you say that he's a nice guy, the apologist. Mike Licona is a good guy. He was a genuine believer. Like I was a believer for 30 years, hardcore Fundy believer, but I wasn't a bad person, right? And we tend to put people in these boxes. And so I think it's a great example of what you're about to do. You're going to discuss ideas, facts, claims. You're going to get into the weeds of it, but you're not throwing mud at each other and saying this person's an idiot,
No, he's not an idiot, but he does hold the views that I think are wrong. And I do think the implications of this idea that you can prove Christianity to be true. I think that the implications of that are very troubling and problematic. Because if you can prove Christianity is true, like you can just on historical grounds, like objectively, in a disinterested way, demonstrate the truth of Christianity, that means every other religion is false. And it means that Christian claims about social issues are necessarily true. And so what does that do about, what did it do about the views of slavery in this country? What does it do about views of women? And social issues that we're all very concerned about? It makes it problematic because if you've got a Bible that doesn't have any mistakes in it, you just quote that baby all you want and forget gay rights or forget, women's role in the world or whatever. It's not good.
So when it comes to the resurrection, are you expecting quoting the Bible to prove the Bible? I hear a lot of that kind of thing. Well, the scriptures say, it's like, I just know in my heart we have to be true to the Bible. Who was that pastor recently, Pastor Douglas, who said, I'm not interested in watering down the scriptures to make it more palatable for the masses. But he's essentially starting with the answer. He's starting with the Bible and saying, I base it on that. Well, you expecting that in the debate? The Bible says kind of thing?
No, it'll be nothing like that. Nothing like that. Mike is not, he's not like bringing a big black leather bound Bible and pounding it and saying the word of God says. It's not like that at all. He is going to be arguing that historians have certain criteria that they use in order to establish what happened in the past, and that the gospel accounts of Jesus' resurrection fully pass these criteria, and that they need to be treated as historical documents, not just as documents of faith, and that as historical documents, they demonstrate that Jesus was raised from the dead. I think that is completely wrong. and I'll be explaining why I think it's completely wrong, but it's not going to be just kind of Bible thumping, the Bible says kind of thing.
I just want to throw this out since I know you're a Jesus studies guy. I was raised in this sort of white bread, corn-fed Midwestern Baptist kind of a culture where we've got a Caucasian Jesus on the painting in the lobby and whatnot. And I saw somebody say on Twitter the other day that there are no white people in the Bible. Obviously we've seen the reports of what Christ might have looked like, but is that an accurate statement? Like, we have totally misrepresented or misconstrued the idea of what Jesus might have looked like had he existed.
Yeah, I used to tell my my students back when they knew who this was. I guess I need to pick a new example now, but I would tell them that Jesus did not look like a blonde, blue-eyed California boy. He looked like Yasser Arafat.
Well, the ones I see, it looks like kind of a white Yanni. He's got that sort of long-haired, ethereal kind
Absolutely.
of vibe to him.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's interesting. Many years ago, I was teaching a course on Jesus, how Jesus has been portrayed through history, not in visual art, but just like how he'd been understood throughout history. And I had is it like a 6-week thing I did for some teachers or something? And I had somebody come in for one of the sessions who talked about the Black Jesus. In the African American community, there's been a movement to argue that Jesus actually was from Africa. You have all these things about him being in Egypt and stuff, and I obviously don't subscribe to that, but it was really interesting the response that this guest presenter got, because the people they're mainly teachers from North Carolina, grade school, high school teachers and things, who were just there for extra education, but they had no problem at all with the various portrayals of Jesus, as Jesus being, political revolutionary, or Jesus being like a feminist, or Jesus being a Marxist, or, various views that you get out there today. But once you mention the Black Jesus, oh my God, they went nuts. Oh, no, he wasn't Black. No. Look, I saw him on TV the other day.
I did a presentation years ago called The Changing Face of Jesus, and I found it interesting, and you can confirm or disconfirm or give an opinion about how the Jesus of various cultures looks like them. I mean, I saw an Asian Jesus, there's a Native American Jesus, Black Jesus, Mexican Jesus. It's an interesting sort of a social experiment. You see how people have they fashioned a God in their own image?
Yes, they have, and he not only looks like you, he acts like you, and wants you to, so people, it is very interesting. I mean, people who are Marxists imagine a Marxist Jesus, and people who are capitalists imagine a capitalist Jesus, and people who are people who are feminists think Jesus is a feminist, and people who are white nationalists think Jesus is a white nationalist. I mean, you just go down the line, and so you paint Jesus in your own image, and then you find the verses that back it up. Well, that's not really a very good way to do history.
You see Christ as the good guy in the Bible story? When you look at him, I mean, you have to put him in a box. You can take that anywhere you want, but was he?
I do think that I think Jesus' central message was wrong. I think that Jesus believed that the end of the world was coming in his own generation, and that God would destroy everything that was opposed. All the forces of evil would be destroyed. There'd be a resurrection of the dead. A kingdom of God would come, utopian existence for all of God's followers. And I think that's all wrong. Of course, that didn't happen. I do think, though, that Jesus did teach an ethic that is admirable. I think he really did teach that the most important thing before God is to treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself, and to help people who are in need. Jesus taught that because he thought that's how you're going to get into this kingdom that's going to come, in 12 years. But and I don't, I don't believe the kingdom stuff, but I actually think the ethic is right. And I think that it's right for me. And I think probably if more people subscribe to it, it'd be a better place.
If somebody like me kind of sees two Jesuses, because I see one Jesus that he has a rather charitable view of the world, and the disadvantaged and the poor and the lepers and the prostitutes and, whatever the Bible else throws out there. And he's the one who opened his doors. But I also see the Jesus who's like his evil twin. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword to turn a son against his father, a daughter against her mother. I've come, the enemies will be in your own household, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, God had some pretty hardcore words for people as far as a popularity contest. Choose me, even if it means hating your family. I mean, that's pretty dark stuff, right? How would you approach that in the Jesus
very dark
context?
The hard thing with the historical Jesus, this relates to the debate. The debate is kind of dealing with the key issue about this. But the whole thing with the gospel stories about Jesus is deciding what's historical and what's not historical. And so people who are scholars who spend their lives studying the historical Jesus, they literally go line by line, almost word for word, through everything Jesus is said to have said, and they evaluate it based on a number of critical criteria to decide, is this something that actually goes back to Jesus or not? It's the same thing we do with Abraham Lincoln. I mean, you figure out, did he really say that or not? It's a little easier with Lincoln because you got that. I guess you don't have the envelope, but for the Gettysburg, but you got stuff. And the farther back you go, it's hard. I mean, how do you document what Charlemagne really said? I mean, it gets hard, but historians do that with every figure. And we do it with Jesus. And I think that these passages, I mean, I will say this, the idea that Jesus in the Gospels embraces family values, you just wonder if these people have read the Gospels, because precisely for what you're saying, Jesus tells his followers to leave their families behind to follow him. I mean, if anybody knew anything about the ancient world, they'd realize just how amazing that would be, because, a wife couldn't go out and earn a living except in very unpleasant ways. And so if the husband leaves, there's no way to support the family anymore except for doing these unpleasant things. So
at one point he said, don't even bother to go say goodbye, like just drop everything and come with me. I mean, that's pretty harsh.
It's harsh. But the question is, what goes back to the historical Jesus? The idea of dividing the families, I think, is almost certainly something that happens after Jesus. What happens is Jesus dies, people say he's get raised, some people start believing it, other people don't believe it, and families split over the matter. The split in the families is almost certainly something after Jesus' death within the early Christian community, where you'd have a family where some people were believers and some were not, and it split the family. I don't think Jesus had that big of influence in his own time. I think Jesus I don't think he's particularly influential, frankly. And so a lot of the stuff that's said about him in the Gospels, I think is almost certainly not historical. And the trick is figuring out what is historical and how do you decide?
Well, if we're going to debate the resurrection here on this April date, we get into, of course, the crucifixion.
Yeah.
And that's problematic, isn't it? I mean, we see the celebration of an atonement, essentially blood magic is what it is, right? I mean, Jesus shed blood has to cover all of humankind. And I see that as kind of a tragic story, because the implication is that we're all, like the Bible says, there was no one worthy, no, not one. We're so awful that Jesus had to come and kill himself on our behalf.
Yeah.
How would you speak to the crucifixion?
Well, that God killed his own son. Really? Yeah. Even, I'll tell you, this is not well known, I think, but even sophisticated Christian theologians who are actually Christian, who are, theologians, Christian theologians are really more like philosophers than anything. The good ones are like off the chart smart. So they're not just a bunch of idiots. They all find the atonement the most problematic thing. They can't figure it out either. It's like they say, oh God, it's the worst. How do you deal with the atonement? So my view is that, here's my view. I think the crucifixion absolutely happened. I have no doubt in my mind, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. And I can explain why, but absolutely happened. And it was the last thing the disciples thought was going to happen. They really thought Jesus was going to be the king of this kingdom, and the kingdom's coming. Jesus will be the king. We're going to rule with him. Oh, it's going to be great. And they go to Jerusalem to declare this message, and Jesus gets arrested and put on trial and gets crucified for crimes against the state. So basically, he's tortured to death in public. And so the disciples have to figure out what to do with that. We thought he was the Messiah. Once they start believing in the resurrection, that's it. He didn't come to save us from the Romans. He came to save us from our sins. Well, how does that work? Well, we sacrifice animals. He must be the human sacrifice. He's the perfect sacrifice. And they run with that. And you get with the doctrine of the atonement then, which is a horrible doctrine.
Well, I mean, do you think they're basing that on the Old Testament text, the atonement sacrifices of, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, etc.?
Partly, but also partly because it's just what they did in their religion. If they're in Jerusalem, the whole point of Jerusalem is you've got this temple there where they sacrifice animals. And every religion in the ancient world practiced the sacrifice of animals. And the way to get on the God's good side, whether it's in any one of the Roman religions or the Greek religion or within Judaism, on God's side is by animal sacrifice. So the gods require blood. And so it's not our way of thinking of kind of, happy Jesus walking through the fields of Galilee. It's more like, oh my God, this is a bloody thing. And it was a bloody thing.
So when you go into the debate, you're not going to disagree that there was a crucifixion. You guys are going to sort of square off on, did he rise from the dead?
Yeah, it's a debate about the resurrection. I don't think there can be any doubt that Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. I mean, yeah.
I could go there again, but I'm not going to do it.
No, it isn't about apart from the mythicist thing. Even if I don't think there's any way Jesus grew up to be an old man in Nazareth. If you evaluate how one decides what happened in the past, and you don't do it with respect to Christianity, you just figure out, like, how do I know this, that, or the other thing about Julius Caesar, or about Pompey, or about anybody else, about Socrates? If you just figure that out and you apply those criteria to issues of whether Jesus got crucified, there is almost no doubt. And so again, it's not a debated issue.
All right. Well, I don't mean to derail us off there. Before we come to the conclusion of our conversation, and again, the links to the debates and to your course on Genesis and your website in general will all be in the description box. And you may not take this hard line, but I've come to this position that I think the idea of God needing apologists refutes the idea of a benevolent God. Why wouldn't he demonstrate or explain in the simplest of terms what it is he wants? Because even if I thought that he needed a teacher to serve the teacher, I put 50 apologists in a room and it's freaking Thunderdome. I mean, they disagree on everything from, literal Adam and Eve to how do you get the Holy Spirit to how do you baptize? What's hell look like? Is there even a hell? I mean, you've seen the apologists square off, right?
Yeah. It's a really good point. And what makes it really kind of ironically interesting is that most people that you ask, why wouldn't God just explain it to us? Why wouldn't he make it so there's no doubt about it? And they say, well, you just have to have faith. And I actually think that's exactly right. You have to have faith. It's not based on history. It's not based on logic or argument. It's based on personal faith. And so that's fine. I mean, people believe all sorts of things. I mean, I'm sure you and I believe, I'm sure I believe all sorts of things that are wrong, that in 200 years, people are going to look back and say, can you believe those people back then thought that? That's crazy. So I'm sure we all believe things are wrong, but it's good to know what's a belief and what's something else. The square root of 9 is not a belief. and the theory of gravity is not called a theory because there's some doubt about it. and it's just not like that with claims about faith. Jesus' resurrection, you can't accept that unless you've got faith. You're just not going to. It's not an accident that nobody except for the Christians think so. If it were provable, then why wouldn't everybody else say, oh yeah, you're right. Square root of 9 is 3. Jesus really was raised from the dead. It's not like that.
I will be watching the debate with interest when it happens. All the links in the description box. I'm sure we'll continue to drop your name casually in conversation. Well, Dr. Ehrman says this. That's just, kind of how we roll around here. But I do appreciate the conversation. I appreciate your good work. It's nice to see somebody who is helping to explain and dissect and sort of make accessible a lot of these Bible-related studies for those of us who don't have PhDs. I mean, we want to participate in any way we can, and the way you present the material helps us to do that. Final pitch for your website and for the debate. I mean, give me the pamphlet for everybody, man.
Yeah, well, okay, there are two things, really. I mean, for those who don't know, I've got a blog that they really should pay attention to, because if they're interested in any of this stuff, because I post 5 times a week, 1,200 words or so, 5 times on all sorts of issues related to the stuff we're talking about, and lots of other things. It's on my blog. And then I've got this website where I advertise my courses, including the resurrection debate. The website is just bartehrman.com. And the blog is just called the Bart Ehrman blog. And so if people are interested in this stuff, I've got several courses. I'm going to have a lot more. I provide other kinds of services on the website. So they should just check one or both of those things out.
All right. Best wishes with the debate. It'll be interesting to see it all play out. And thanks again for a conversation today. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, great. My pleasure. Thanks so much.